The quiet hum of Maple Creek, Ohio, was usually the soundtrack to my days. At 40, Rowan Hayes had built a life here that was as meticulously organized as it was serene. My home, half of a cozy duplex, felt like a sanctuary, a place where peace wasn't just a concept, but a tangible presence. My daughter, 18 and on the cusp of her own adventures, was my constant companion, her laughter a bright counterpoint to my more methodical nature. We had two dogs, a boisterous Labrador mix named Buster and a gentle golden retriever called Luna, and a sleek black cat named Midnight who ruled the roost with a velvet paw. Our little menagerie was a testament to our love for animals, and for years our backyard fence had been a friendly meeting place for our dogs and those of our previous neighbors, a joyful exchange of wags and playful nuzzles. Life in its essence was good. Predictable, yes, but predictably comforting. I valued order, the quiet rhythms of a well-run home, and the unspoken understanding that existed between us and the families living nearby. My resilience had been tested before in ways I rarely spoke of, but it had forged in me a deep-seated desire to protect those I cared about, to ensure their safety and well-being. This protective streak, a quiet but firm resolve, usually manifested in ensuring my elderly mother had everything she needed, or in advocating for those in our community who couldn't quite advocate for themselves. But I never imagined it would be tested by a neighbor, let alone by a small, yapping dog. Then, just before Christmas, a new presence arrived next door. Vicky, a woman I guessed to be in her 60s, moved into the other half of our duplex. We being us made a batch of classic Midwest puppy chow, a sweet, comforting blend of peanut butter and chocolate dusted with powdered sugar, and took it over as a welcome gift. She was a small woman with a hunched posture and a tendency to mumble, making conversation a frustrating exercise in guesswork. Her dog, a scruffy terrier, was skittish, darting behind her legs as we introduced ourselves. We thought little of it. New surroundings, new people, it was understandable for an animal to be a bit wary. We were animal lovers after all. We hoped he'd soon warm up and become another friendly face, another happy tail wagging through the fence. That hope, however, was quickly dashed. The first time Buster and Luna approached the fence, expecting their usual friendly greeting, Vicky's terrier erupted. A vicious snarl, a blur of teeth, and a frenzy of barking that made the hair on my arms stand up. Buster and Luna, caught off guard, recoiled. My heart sank a little. This wasn't the friendly introduction we'd envisioned. We told ourselves he was just scared, adjusting to his new home. Our dogs were bigger, sure. Buster came up to my knee, Luna a little taller, but they were gentle giants, not aggressors. Still, the incident left a sour taste. It was the first discordant note in the harmony of our peaceful lives, a tiny crack in the foundation. I didn't realize then that it was only the beginning of a relentless, escalating nightmare that would force me to tap into every ounce of my protective, methodical, and resilient nature. The curiosity began to gnaw at me. How would this small, aggressive dog and his seemingly incapable owner truly impact our carefully cultivated peace? What would it take to restore the quiet that had once been our right? The backyard skirmishes were a daily irritation, but the true disruption began to manifest in our front courtyard. It started subtly, a flash of brown fur out of the corner of my eye, a sudden bark where there should have been silence. Then it became a pattern, a daily occurrence. Vicky's terrier, unleashed, darting wildly around the shared space, oblivious to the dangers of our parking area or the street beyond. It was almost comical watching Vicky attempt to catch him, a flailing, mumbling chase scene that played out multiple times a day. At first, I tried to be understanding. Maybe he was an escape artist, maybe she was overwhelmed, but then the dog began to run directly into our parking space as I pulled my car in, or dart into the street just as another car passed. My heart would lurch into my throat. The thought of hitting an animal, any animal, was abhorrent. I approached Vicky, trying to keep my voice even, polite but firm. "Vicky," I began, "could you please keep your dog on a leash? I'm so worried about hitting him. He runs right into our parking area and even into the street." She mumbled something incoherent, her eyes darting away, but I did manage to pick out a few words about him chewing through his leashes. It was an excuse, not a solution, and predictably nothing changed. The off-leash escapades continued, a constant source of anxiety, a persistent shadow over our comings and goings. The aggression, once confined to the backyard fence, began to bleed into the front of the duplex. There were instances where my daughter and I, walking without our dogs, would find ourselves confronted by the terrier, growling and snapping at our heels. He'd charge us, a low, guttural bark rumbling in his chest, making us instinctively brace ourselves even though he was small. It was unsettling, but we dismissed it as a display of bravado from a little dog trying to assert himself. Then came the incident that struck a deep, primal chord within me, igniting a fury that had simmered beneath the surface for far too long. My daughter was taking out the trash one afternoon when she witnessed it. Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor from down the street, frail and moving with the careful slowness of age, was making her way to her mailbox. Suddenly, Vicky's dog, materializing from nowhere, charged Mrs. Henderson. He wasn't just barking, he was lunging, snapping at her ankles. Mrs. Henderson gasped, her face blanching, and instinctively she picked up a fallen stick, waving it frantically to ward off the snarling terrier. My daughter rushed to help, shouting at the dog, scaring it off. When my daughter recounted the story, a cold dread seized me. Mrs. Henderson, elderly, frail. My mind immediately flashed back to my own mother years ago when a large, unleashed dog had bounded at her while she was gardening, knocking her off her feet. She hadn't been physically injured, but the terror, the sheer helplessness in her eyes had haunted me for weeks. She'd been a vibrant, active woman before that, but something had shifted within her that day. She became more hesitant, more fearful, especially around unfamiliar dogs. That incident had sparked in me a deep, unshakable frustration with unchecked irresponsibility, a quiet vow to always advocate for the vulnerable. And now seeing Mrs. Henderson, a woman so like my own mother in her gentle vulnerability, subjected to such terror, reignited that old fire, burning hotter and brighter than ever before. This was no longer just an annoyance, it was a threat to the safety and peace of our community. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my dogs anymore, it was about protecting everyone. Still, I tried to be reasonable. My methodical nature, the part of me that believed in finding practical solutions, urged me to give Vicky another chance. I went to the pet store, picked out a sturdy, heavy-duty chain leash, one that even the most determined chewer would struggle with. I put it in a small gift bag with a handful of dog treats and penned a polite yet pointed note. Dear Vicky, it read, we're concerned for your dog's safety and for the safety of others. Please, for everyone's peace of mind, keep him on a leash. This chain leash should help. It was an olive branch, an attempt to bypass her incoherent mumbling to offer a tangible solution. I tucked it into her mailbox, hoping against hope that this gesture would finally get through. It didn't. The dog continued to run loose, the chain leash seemingly swallowed by the abyss of her apathy. Our daily walks became exercises in hypervigilance. If her dog happened to be outside, he would inevitably charge Buster and Luna, snarling and snapping, forcing me to tighten their leashes to pull them back to try and maneuver around him while shouting at Vicky, who would usually be nowhere in sight. The backyard, once a place of relaxation, became a minefield. She routinely left her back door open, allowing her terrier to dart in and out at will. My dogs, simply needing to relieve themselves, would run out, and the little terror would invariably charge the fence, initiating a brawl. My dogs naturally reacted, barking, jumping, protecting their space. It was a constant, draining battle. The tension, which had been building slowly, finally snapped 2 weeks later. Buster and Luna were having one of their usual skirmishes through the fence with Vicky's dog. I was trying to pull them back inside, frustrated by their barking, when a guest of Vicky's, standing by the open back door watching the entire spectacle without making any attempt to intervene, shouted loudly back into the house, "You should call animal control." My blood ran cold. The audacity, the sheer nerve of it, my own dogs, provoked relentlessly, defending their own yard, and she dared to suggest we were the problem. I whipped my head around, my jaw tight. "Oh, you want me to call animal control?" I practically roared, my voice vibrating with a furious energy I hadn't known I possessed. "I will call animal control, believe me I will." The words hung in the air, a declaration of war. My daughter, standing beside me, heard my furious outburst and immediately burst into tears, her anxiety flaring, convinced they would blame Buster and Luna, take them away. "No, Mom, please, no," she sobbed, clutching my arm. Until this point, my daughter had been the reigning voice of reason, reigning in my inner Karen, urging me to be courteous, to give Vicky the benefit of the doubt. But this was the last straw. The threat, however indirect, against my beloved dogs, against the very safety of our home, ripped away the last vestiges of my polite patience. This incident, coming on the heels of the trauma to Mrs. Henderson, solidified my resolve. Once my daughter calmed down, once she understood that we were unequivocally in the right, that our dogs were victims of Vicky's negligence, not aggressors, we sat down and formulated a plan, a methodical, relentless plan. "We need evidence," I declared, my voice quiet but firm. "Everything, every single incident, every time that dog is off leash, every time he harasses us, every time he starts a fight at the fence." My daughter, now resolute, nodded. And so the meticulous documentation began. We literally had dozens of recordings. Video after video, timestamped, showing that little monster running freely, often with Vicky nowhere in sight. In almost every one of these recordings, our dogs were either calmly observing his antics or barking back only when he barked and jumped aggressively at our windows or at them through the fence. We even captured a video of him charging us as we tried to take Buster and Luna for a walk, again off-leash. That was the only time Vicky had ever offered a half-hearted apology for his behavior, mumbling something about how he got out unexpectedly. But even then, the lack of real remorse was palpable. This growing collection of undeniable proof became our shield, our weapon, our promise that the tide was about to turn. We were no longer just reacting, we were building a case. The question now was not if we would use it, but when and how to ensure maximum impact. Every new video clip was a step forward, a progression towards an inevitable confrontation. The relentless recording continued, a steady, methodical drumbeat of accumulating evidence. We became like urban naturalists, patiently observing the chaotic ecosystem next door. Today was no different. Vicky's dog was predictably running free again. My daughter, ever vigilant, pulled out her phone and started recording. This time, however, Vicky noticed. She was peering out her window, her face contorted into a snarl. She grumbled something through the glass, a familiar, incomprehensible murmur. But her gestures, those flailing arms and pointed fingers, spoke volumes. She was furious. My daughter simply held the phone steady, continuing to record. A few minutes later, a sharp knock rattled our front door. It was Vicky. Her face was flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Why are you recording me?" she demanded, her voice unusually clear, stripped of its usual mumbling by her indignation. My daughter, calm and composed, stood her ground. "Yes, I am recording," she confirmed, her gaze steady. And we're recording because your dog is constantly off leash, running into the street and threatening us and our dogs. We've asked you multiple times to keep him on a leash and nothing has changed." Vicky's anger seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by her usual barrage of mumbled excuses. Her life was hard, she stammered. She was caring for her disabled sister and her elderly mother. The dog, she insisted, was all she had, and then the plea, "Please don't call animal control." My daughter simply reminded her that we had only ever asked for the dog to be on a leash or kept in a kennel to prevent these issues. We didn't actually want to call animal control. We were recording her and her dog to defend our own, a necessity born from her negligence. She hadn't even bothered to negate the threat made by her guest or apologize for it. We were outside constantly. She had had ample opportunity to address the situation without needing to come to our door, but it seemed the recording had struck a nerve. The next day, the dog was out again, terrorizing a delivery driver who had to retreat to his truck to avoid the snapping little beast. I recorded it all, a meticulous chronicler of her failures. Later that afternoon, Vicky herself was out struggling to herd her dog, who was barking incessantly at a squirrel. I held up my phone, making it clear I was recording. She saw me, her eyes narrowed, her face turned a dangerous shade of puce. She started talking through the window again, a stream of garbled, angry sounds, but her furious gestures jabbing towards me were crystal clear. I was done with her crap. I opened my door, my own resolve hardening. She turned, stomped across the few feet of lawn separating our porches, and marched right up to my steps. "You'll see what happens if you get my dog taken away," she hissed, her voice sharp with menace, my breath caught in my throat. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach, quickly replaced by a white-hot surge of pure fury. I'm 47 years old and I've never been in a physical fight in my life, but in that moment I was ready, my hands clenched at my sides. "Oh, really?" I retorted, my voice low and dangerous, a tremor running through me that was half fear, half righteous indignation. I squared my shoulders, ready to face her, ready to push back. The unexpected aggression in my posture, the uncharacteristic fierceness in my tone, seemed to catch her off guard. She faltered, her face shifting from menace to a strange, almost pleading expression. The bluster evaporated and she quickly reverted to her familiar litany of excuses. Her disabled sister, her elderly mother, how hard her life was, how the dog was all she had. It was a broken record, a pathetic attempt to elicit sympathy where there was none left. "Those are not my problems, Vicky," I stated, cutting through her excuses like a knife. My voice was steady now, infused with an unyielding determination. "All I have asked is that you keep your dog on a leash, that is it. Safety and everyone else's." She started again, insisting she was trying her best. "Trying your best?" I scoffed, gesturing around the yard. "This is happening every single day, Vicky, every day." Just then my daughter joined us on the porch, her expression grim. And then from Vicky's side of the duplex, her daughter, a woman in her 30s we'll call Ashley, emerged, drawn by the raised voices. Ashley was visiting, so she hadn't been part of any of our previous frustrating interactions. She immediately jumped into the fray, her voice shrill and aggressive. "Your dogs are always jumping and barking through the fence?" Ashley snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at our house. My daughter, ever sharp, shot back without missing a beat. "Jumping and barking in their own yard is not illegal, Ashley," Ashley scoffed. "Your big dog is going to jump over the fence?" she declared, as if it were an undeniable truth. I bit back a laugh. Buster, bless his heart, despite his best efforts, barely touched the top of the fence when he leaped. In the 4 years we'd lived here, he had never, not once, managed to get over it. His aggression was barrier aggression, a display of barking and jumping within the confines of his own territory. On walks on leash, he was a timid soul, avoiding other people and dogs, never barking or lunging. He was, in fact, remarkably well behaved outside our yard. "And it's not illegal for her dog to be off leash either," Ashley proclaimed triumphantly, planting her hands on her hips. My daughter's face was priceless. She simply scoffed, a genuine, exasperated sound. Yeah, it is," she deadpanned. Ashley's response was immediate and vulgar. "F the law," she spat, her eyes flashing. She then began to taunt us, claiming we were scared of Vicky's dog, as if our concern for safety meant we were weak, or even worse, not dog people. The sheer ignorance and ridiculousness of her arguments were astounding. She clearly wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. We were talking in circles, the conversation becoming more heated, Ashley growing increasingly aggressive, her face red with what I could only assume was inherited stubbornness. That's when my daughter, seizing the moment, delivered the final blow. "All right," she declared, her voice ringing with a new, quiet authority cutting through the escalating chaos. "We're just going to call the landlord." And animal control? The effect was instantaneous. A sudden, jarring silence fell over the small porch. Vicky and Ashley froze, the bluster drained from Ashley's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. Vicky's eyes widened, a dawning realization spreading across her features. I don't think they had even considered the landlord as a factor. Vicky had been so focused on avoiding animal control, she seemed to have completely forgotten the bigger picture. The impact this entire conflict could have on her housing. It was a detail I knew, one that offered a potent leverage point. Not long after Vicky had moved in, she'd ghosted our landlord when she got behind on her rent, almost getting evicted. We had even posted the eviction notice on her door ourselves, since our landlord wasn't local. That small fact, shared quietly between my daughter and me, had suddenly become a crucial piece of our strategy. Now Vicky's tune changed remarkably. "Did they talk to you about this, Mom?" Ashley asked, her voice laced with sudden concern. Vicky, visibly deflated, admitted that we had, even acknowledging that we had given her a leash. Looking back, their sudden change in tone, their almost frantic shift from belligerence to a strange sort of appeasement, made me wonder if the landlord even knew about the dog in the first place, or if Vicky had violated a pet clause in her lease agreement. "I just want everyone to get along," Vicky mumbled, her voice meek now. "I just want you to keep your dog on a leash," I reiterated, my voice firm, unwilling to let her off the hook with empty platitudes. Then came the familiar flood of excuses again. This was her first dog, she insisted, and she was trying to train him. My daughter and I exchanged a glance. Even after everything, after the threats and the confrontations, our protective and methodical natures still compelled us to try and offer genuine solutions. We suggested crating him or putting a baby gate in front of her front door to keep him from bolting when she opened it. I even told her about a thrift store in our area that had reasonably priced pet supplies and whose proceeds went to the local humane society. We reiterated our sympathy for her troubles, but the bottom line remained: the dog needed to be under control. She listened, nodded, mumbled some more, but the air remained heavy with the unspoken understanding that our patience was truly, utterly exhausted. The ball was now in her court, and we had made it clear that the next move would involve formal action. The outrage I felt had morphed into a steely determination, a cold focus on the logical next steps. My audience, I hoped, felt that shift too, from the sheer frustration of the conflict to the grim satisfaction of a carefully laid plan beginning to unfold. The fight was far from over, but the turning point was here. The confrontation with Vicky and Ashley had been exhausting, but it had served a crucial purpose. It had confirmed what I suspected: polite requests, common sense, and even direct confrontation were useless. Vicky was incapable or unwilling to change. Her excuses were a shield, her aggression a defense mechanism, and her daughter a misguided enabler. But it had also given us a powerful new weapon: the threat of the landlord. The fear in Vicky's eyes when the landlord was mentioned was a flicker of hope, a potential Achilles heel. My protective instinct, fueled by the memory of my mother's trauma and the threat to Mrs. Henderson, now blended seamlessly with my methodical nature. It was time to stop reacting and start orchestrating. My daughter and I spent the rest of the day in a flurry of activity, not of anger, but of strategic planning. Our massive collection of recordings was our primary asset. We went through them methodically, creating a detailed log: date, time, specific incident. Each entry was a damning indictment. Jan 15, 2:30 p.m., dog off leash, ran into street, nearly hit by car, Vicky nowhere in sight. Feb 3, 10:00 a.m., dog charged Mrs. Henderson, elderly neighbor, witnessed by daughter. March 10, 4:15 p.m., dog initiated fence fight with Buster and Luna, incessant barking for 15 minutes. Vicky observed from window, did not intervene. We even included the video of Ashley's F the law outburst. It was a meticulous, irrefutable timeline of negligence and aggression. This was how I would advocate for the vulnerable. My next step was to contact our landlord. Mr. Abernathy was a decent man, but he managed multiple properties and wasn't local, which meant he often relied on us to be his eyes and ears. I compiled a concise, professional letter detailing the escalating issues, the numerous attempts we'd made to resolve them directly, and the escalating threats and aggression from Vicky and her daughter. I emphasized the safety concerns, particularly involving Mrs. Henderson, and the risk to the dog himself. Crucially, I attached a flash drive containing every single video and a printout of our detailed incident log. I also subtly reminded him of Vicky's past issues with rent, suggesting that this behavioral pattern might indicate a broader disregard for her lease agreement. I didn't want to just complain, I wanted to present an open and shut case that demanded immediate action. 2 days later, Mr. Abernathy called. His voice, usually jovial, was grim. "Rowan, I've just watched your videos," he said, a note of disbelief in his tone. "Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable, and that threat she made. That's crossing a line." He confirmed that Vicky's lease had a strict pet clause requiring all animals to be leashed outside the property and forbidding any behavior that disturbed other tenants or posed a safety risk. He also confirmed that no, he had not been aware of the extent of the problem nor of the dog's uncontrolled behavior. He was especially concerned about the incident with Mrs. Henderson. The protective part of me swelled with a grim satisfaction. This was it, this was the moment. "I'm issuing her a formal warning immediately," he stated firmly. "And if this isn't resolved within a week, I'm starting eviction proceedings. This is a clear violation of her lease and a serious safety hazard. I can't have this on my property." A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled my knees washed over me. This was the progress I had yearned for, the promise finally delivering, but I knew Vicky. A formal warning would likely be ignored. My methodical mind was already planning for the next step. The warning letter arrived in Vicky's mailbox the next day, delivered by a process server, adding a layer of official gravity. For 2 days there was an eerie quiet. The dog was still seen, but he was always inexplicably on a leash. A cheap nylon leash, but a leash nonetheless. My daughter and I exchanged cautious glances. Had it worked? The threat of losing her home finally got through to her. Then, on the third day, the flimsy leash snapped. Or perhaps it was chewed through, or maybe, just maybe, it was simply released. The little terrier was back, a blur of brown fur, zipping around the courtyard, narrowly missing a young mother pushing a stroller. My heart sank. Vicky, standing by her open door, threw up her hands in a familiar gesture of helplessness, mumbling something about "the dog just got away." This was it. This was the catalyst. The rock bottom, not for me, not anymore, but for Vicky. Her failure to comply, even with a clear warning and her housing on the line, solidified her fate. My resolve became steel. The emotional toll of the past months, the constant vigilance, the fear for my daughter, for my dogs, for my elderly neighbors, the relentless frustration, the despair of dealing with such irrationality, it all coalesced into a singular, unwavering determination. I was tired of being trapped in my own home, tired of the anxiety every time I stepped outside. I was the advocate for the vulnerable, and it was time to force consequences. This wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming our peace, restoring safety to our community. I called Mr. Abernathy immediately. "He's off leash again," I reported, my voice devoid of emotion. "Just 3 days after your warning." I sent him the new video, a brief but damning clip. "That's all I need, Rowan," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm starting the eviction process today. She's got 30 days. The final confrontation wasn't a dramatic showdown on the porch, not in the way one might expect. It was a cold legal process driven by irrefutable evidence and the landlord's authority. Vicky received her eviction notice a few days later. She marched over to our door, clutching the official document, her face ashen. She looked older, smaller, her usual anger replaced by a desperate, pleading vulnerability. "You did this," she accused, her voice barely a whisper. "You called the landlord. You're trying to take everything from me." My protective side had won, but I still felt a strange emptiness. "Vicky," I said, my voice calm, "we tried to tell you, we asked you so many times. All you had to do was keep your dog on a leash. This was your choice. Your actions had consequences." She started to cry, soft, choked sobs. She mumbled about her sister, her mother, her hard life, how she had nowhere to go. My daughter, standing behind me, squeezed my arm. Even after everything, there was a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, but mine remained hard. My mother's traumatized face, Mrs. Henderson's terror, they were etched into my memory. Her excuses were no longer valid. "I hope you find somewhere safe for your dog, Vicky," I said, a final, unyielding statement. I closed the door softly, leaving her standing alone on the porch, the eviction notice crumpled in her hand. The silence that followed was deafening and profoundly, wonderfully peaceful. The next few weeks were a strange blend of anticipation and continued vigilance. Vicky made no further attempts to engage with us, her curtains drawn, her back door remaining shut. We still saw her dog on occasion, but he was always meticulously on a leash. It was a temporary truce, a calm before the final storm. Then on a dreary Tuesday morning, a moving truck pulled up to Vicky's side of the duplex. My daughter and I watched from our living room window as two burly men began loading boxes. Vicky was nowhere in sight, but Ashley was there, directing them, her face grim. They worked quickly, efficiently. By late afternoon, the truck was packed, the front door locked, and the duplex next door stood empty, eerily silent. A profound sense of relief washed over me, a physical lightness I hadn't realized I'd been missing for months. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach began to unravel. The backyard was quiet. The front courtyard was clear. There was no more snarling, no more barking, no more fear of a small, aggressive dog charging out of nowhere. We had reclaimed our peace. The grand payoff was the quiet. It was the ability to open our back door without fear, to let Buster and Luna out to stretch their legs without a barrage of aggression from next door. It was watching my daughter walk to her car, head high, no longer bracing for an encounter. It was seeing Mrs. Henderson walking to her mailbox, unburdened by fear, perhaps even unaware of the quiet battle that had been fought on her behalf. My role as the advocate for the vulnerable had reached its resolution, and the justice was palpable. A week later, Mr. Abernathy called again. He thanked me profusely for my diligence and patience. He informed me that Vicky had indeed left, but that she hadn't taken the dog with her. Animal control had been called by Mr. Abernathy as per a clause in the lease about abandoned animals. The little terrier, surrendered by Vicky at the last minute, was now at a local shelter undergoing behavioral assessment. This information struck a bittersweet chord. As an animal lover, the thought of any animal in a shelter weighed on me. But a few weeks later, something surprising happened. I received a small, handwritten note in my mailbox. It was from the Maple Creek Animal Shelter. "Dear Rowan," it read, "we wanted to let you know that the terrier you reported has found his forever home. After extensive training and socialization, he was adopted by a quiet couple with no other pets who understand his specific needs. He's thriving." A small, genuine smile touched my lips. The little terror, now named Shadow because of his initial skittishness, had found a chance at a better life, free from the neglect and mismanagement that had turned him into a neighborhood menace. It was a surprising twist, a final layer of complexity to a difficult situation. My motivation hadn't just been about protecting my family and community from a nuisance. It had, in a strange, indirect way, also allowed a troubled animal to find the care he truly needed. It truly felt like justice had been served in all its nuanced forms. Our little corner of Maple Creek, Ohio, was peaceful again, restored to its quiet rhythms, and I, Rowan Hayes, knew I had played a part in making it so. The fight was over, the battle won, and the peace, hard-earned, was finally ours to savor. Subscribe to Neighbours from Hell channel for new Neighbours from Hell stories daily.